unequal impact of the crisis by age and analysis by the national transfer accounts. On behalf of a long list of contributors, I don't know if you have checked that this session counts the most well, not the most presenters, but the most authors. I'm very proud of that.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you everyone for coming. Well, I'm presenting a work from the Spanish team looking at the impact of the crisis in Spain. That, in fact, is one of the countries, as you know, more hit by the crisis. And as Spanish, we are very worried about it, and we thought that maybe with national transfer accounts we could have a look, or a deep look, about what were the consequences, at least in the sphere of the intergenerational distribution. So I want to show you some facts that we can check, or we're going to check in the next slides. The first thing is that the risk of poverty for children is in general higher than for other age groups. This is a reality, this is a fact that is almost present in all high-income countries, but we will have some views later. Then another thing that Robert pointed out this morning, that the welfare state protects basically the elderly, but not, or at least to the same extent the children. And the most important thing, since our point of view, is that the situation has worsened with the crisis, and sometimes, or in some case, in a very significant way, as you're going to see the case of Spain. So, just to have a point to start here, we present the population at risk of poverty in European countries, in European Union countries, before and after social transfers. So we can see very interesting things here. Not only the difference between the risk of poverty for children and for the elderly or the working age group, but also the effects that the social transfers have in this risk of poverty. So as you will see, for the elderly, social transfer is the key to reduce the risk of poverty from 88% to 14% after social transfers, while in the children, this role is much, much light, at least. And the same with working age population. And another important thing that I want to look at is the evolution between 2008 and 2015, because it's the first year of the crisis, and 1 year in the middle of the crisis, or maybe in the final, I'm not sure about that. And so you see that while the risk of poverty for the elderly has reduced, it's not the same case for the children, and neither for working age population. So this leads us to the conclusion, of course, that the social welfare states, are clearly biased in favor of the elderly. So in fact, if we take the NTA data for all these countries that we have here, and we plot the net public transfer to the children in the vertical axis, and to the elderly in the horizontal one, and we divide them by their own consumption, we can see clearly that the picture is biased to the right side. So, for example, if you look at Finland or Hungary, or even France, they are the countries that most finance children consumption. But even though this percentage is around 45%, well, it's much bigger for the elderly. Here, I look at the change in the child poverty and social exclusion. Not only child poverty, adding also the risk of being socially excluded with another indicators, non-monetary indicators. And we can look at the change between the first year of the crisis, of the pre-crisis situation, this is 2008, and 2012. That in most countries, especially in Spain, is usually considered the worst year of the crisis in terms of many macroeconomic indicators. So, as we see, I put a red line here just to point out the countries that worsen the child poverty rate, and the countries that are below the red line that improve the child poverty rate. So, as you see, most of European countries are above this line, and they present such a worrying figures as Greece or Iceland or Latvia or even Spain, that near 40% of children are at risk of poverty or social exclusion. So, and on the top, you can see 3 countries that are not European, but are very interesting for us also. Japan, USA and Canada. And also in USA, the child poverty has increased with the children. It's not the case in Canada, in Japan, or the countries below that are basically Germany and the northern countries, except Denmark, that has worsened also a little bit. So, another interesting thing, the poverty, or the risk of poverty, of course, is especially worrying in the families or households with children. So, but you can see here the differences among some countries in the European Union. So the world champion is Spain, of course, is the one of the top. And the black line is the European average, European Union average. But we can see much better situations as Finland in as the last, or Sweden, or Germany, or France. And this is what happened in Spain with crisis between 2006 and 2013, with the risk of poverty and social exclusion by age. So it's interesting to see at the green line, which is the risk of poverty for the elderly, that decreased from the highest 32 or 33% to less than 15, in fact 40%. While the children has increased and are on the top, has increased a little bit, but the situation was also very bad at the beginning. And the working age population also has worsened. And this is the risk of poverty by type of household in Spain. And another thing that we could check up is that the difference between the households with and without children has increased with the crisis. So our contribution, after looking at all those concerning things, is look at the NTA, recalculate the NTA for the worst year of the crisis in Spain, 2012, and compare this NTA with the previous years to see what exactly happens in terms of monetary transfers, okay? Not time transfers, but rather. So first, we have here the per capita labor income, which is on one of the keys, and you see that the red line is 2006, is maybe the last year of the peak economic situation, and the purple one is 2012. So we see, of course, the profiles are updated to 2012 euros per year, so will be compared. And so in 2012, the labor income profile have declined below the level of 2000. That is the blue one. But not only this, we can appreciate a movement to the right of this profile. So this is saying that young people is probably having problems, very serious problems with the crisis, while older people is maybe delaying their retirement, or at least having more earnings in later life. This is the per capita consumption profile. Also, we see like a general drop of the consumption for all ages. Again, the purple one is 2012, and the blue one is 2000. So, in the case of the children and the elderly, we appreciate a little bit over the 2000 profile, and for the working age population, is practically the same. And looking at the per capita life cycle deficit profile, we can see also that, especially if we look at the part that is a positive, the surplus deficit, it shrinks clearly. So that means that total surplus has become really, really small compared to the precedent years. And this is how life cycle deficit of children are financed through public and private transfers, and also asset-based allocations, although in the case of the children they are very, very small. So you can see on the left side, the figures in billions of euros, and on the right side in percentage. And in both cases, we can appreciate that public transfers have significantly decreased with the children, thing that we already know, while private transfers, at least monetary private transfers, could not compensate that decrease. In the case of the elderly, the public transfers practically maintains their weight in the financing of total consumption. And also, interestingly, if you look at 2000, you can appreciate that the elderly people was given private transfers. And this disappears in 2006 and 2008, but it became again in 2012. So again, elderly are giving transfers to the younger people. Looking at public transfers specifically, these are the profiles in the 4 years, and as you can see, for the children, the profile has returned to the pre-crisis level, while for the elderly, the profile becomes bigger, has not reduced. And you can see also here how young workers, or at least people in working age, are paying much less taxes, while the older workers are paying more. This is obviously the consequence of the library income profile that we looked before. And this is our only inflows, so the public transfers received by each age in per capita terms. As we see, there is a sharp decrease in 2012 for children. So basically, this is because of education, because it's the main public policy directed to children in Spain. While there's a significant increase for ages 65 to 82. There is also an increase for working age population, basically because of the huge increase in unemployment that in Spain, if you don't know, I feel ashamed to say that, but it arrives to 30% of the active population. And this is more specifically looking at education, health, and pensions. As you can see, education has dropped, especially for the younger children, while health has maintained more or less the same, but pensions have increased, at least in a group of age from 60 or 62 to 82. And this is taxes, but I can skip it because I don't have time. So this is per capita profile, so net private transfers. As you can see here, the main flow is from, of course, from working age population to children. And this is the situation of Spain in the 4 years in that map that I plot at the beginning, that the transfers to the young and transfers to the elderly regarding their own consumption. As you see, in 2006, and from 2000 to 2006, the elderly suffer a kind of worsening, but from 2008 and 2012, the years of the crisis, clearly here the drop is for the young people, while the elderly more or less remain or even improve a little bit. So are my findings, just to conclude. Children receive much less public and also private transfers with the crisis, of course, because if there is no labor income, it's difficult to make private transfers. So, as a consequence, their consumption has significantly decreased. Labor income has decreased, especially for younger workers. Children pay similar taxes or even more than before crisis, if you look at the profiles of taxes that I skipped. And on the contrary, public transfers to the elderly have increased with the crisis, not decreased. So our main concern is that welfare state systems have proven to be a very effective way to reduce the inequality, or at least the intergenerational inequality. So our question, now I have to add one thing according to Robert's presentation, but our question is why high-income societies are so worried and so averse to all age inequality, but we can accept child poverty without a flinch. So we consider that it's extremely worrying that 1 of 3 children is in risk of poverty or social exclusion in a highly developed country in Europe. Now, just to finish, to add a thought after the presentation of Robert this morning. So, I accept that if we add time transfers, the picture changes in the sense that children receive a lot. But the question remains, are these transfers effective to reduce child poverty? And I'm afraid no. And the crisis has been a proof and a big test to show that. So maybe we had to be a little bit more concerned about what is happening with our children, especially if I take the question of Gretchen, the transfers to the children, not only time transfers, also public transfers, are not an expenditure, are also an investment. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's not just an excellent presentation of the country case, but a great demonstration of the power of NTA to do proper analysis if you have repeated yearly observations. We have some time for questions. Katerina, and then Tomasz, and then, I don't know your name, yeah.
A very interesting presentation. It's very nice that it was, you have a dialogue between the two perspectives of how to use NTA and how to look at the intergenerational transfers to young and elderly. I think for me this is a lesson in using an aggregate numbers for anything, and this is the lesson for if you look at the aggregate and how society treats children and elderly, it seems to be that the children are doing better. But this is the power. This is the power of the different roles of the public and private transfers, and the reduction of inequality is one of the roles that the public transfers are fulfilling for the old, but not necessarily for the children, because you allow for this internal heterogeneity of the family conditions and the inequality of opportunities that children are having because of that. And I really like that your paper kind of demonstrated it, a different perspective on this issue.
Do you want to react to that?
Oh, I just agree with her. I don't know, did you have any specific question?
No, I thought that, it's not that we had almost more, but a comment.
Okay, yeah, I know, but you want to...
Or maybe it's a question to Robert more than, because
It's not my presentation.
for lunch discussion.
I'm really hungry for the stage, but it's not my time. Don't much, please.
Just a brief reflection. It was very stimulating and very nice presentation with a lot of figures. And in between all these graphs, I wondered what happened between 2006 and 2008, just before the crisis, because you showed huge shifts in the consumption at young ages and huge shifts in the transfers from parents to kids between 2006 and 2008. And this is before the crisis started. So what happened in this period?
No, doesn't happen nothing especially more the crisis. The crisis started in 2008. And
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you show one of the early graphs, one of the first slides, there were huge shifts. Yes.
What?
This one, for instance. There's a huge shift in consumption between 2006 and 2008.
Yeah.
Massive, much bigger than during the crisis. Why is it? Is it
Because the biggest change happened the first year of the crisis, that it was 2008. Then, of course, the decrease were less because there was a big drop in the first year. For example, the PIB, the GDP, decreases a lot in 2008. The drop in GDP was the biggest in 2008, the first year of the crisis in Spain. Also, the increase in public deficit was like 12%, coming from positive values. So 2008 was really the beginning of the crisis in Spain, according to all macroeconomic indicators. We don't have 2007, maybe it would be interesting, but I'm afraid that I guess that from 2006 and 2007, the change was very small, because the situation was yet very smooth in the economy. But 2008, since the beginning of 2008, it was a mess.
But still, I would urge you to look carefully at these data, because a drop in consumption in some age groups by about 25% in one single year, when we know that the unemployment in Spain was rising much more steadily after 2008, for instance. I wonder whether this could be also something the data you see there.
We can check, but this is what we find at the moment, but we will check. Thank you.
We have 2 more questions, and then we will move to the next presentation.
My name is Doris Brummer. I'm from the Austrian Central Bank, and I'm coming from the public finance side, so I have to say that I'm not very familiar with national transfer account. But I had the impression that the drop in monetary transfers to children, which was you observed after or during the crisis, was it just because public wages were cut and not the number of employees? Which means if the amount of teachers would stay the same, the number of teachers, but just the wages are decreased. I mean, you measure less transfers to children, but it might just be more effective than in the end. So I wonder if you have deflated with the public consumption deflator instead of, which should capture this at least partially, instead of a general deflator like consumer price inflation.
Well, the decrease in education was mainly due to the reduction in public expenditure in different policies. Because, for example, they reduce the number of teachers and they increase the number of pupils in each class. So probably these are the 2 main changes, and this is why this decrease is basically concentrated in school ages, not in the higher education, because there the There were also cuts, but they were smoother with the number of teachers, but especially in schools. I remember, basically because I had kids, that the maximum number of pupils, of students by class, just increased from 25 to 30 in 1 month. So they decided that 30 it was perfectly okay.
Maybe we have
May I suggest an answer to your last question? And this would be, it's simply voting rights. The elderly have gained in numbers, so they vote, and that the focus of public expenditure, public transfers, would be more on the elderly. And the answer to this problem would be reduce voting age, maybe to the age of 10 or 8 or even 0, as has been suggested during the childhood.
Well, there was also a very important reducing in children. It was we can say the only family policy that Spain had. It was in 2006 and 2007, that it was a family allowance for each child that was born. And it disappears completely, was cut in 2008. So maybe this is also a reason for the consumption, the drop in consumption in the younger ages.
Thank you very much once again. I think it was a lively discussion, and we have a next presentation.